So I've been talking about double-blind placebo-controlled trials with the idea of covering some of the challenges with these studies. And just to recap, in these studies, people are selected from a group of volunteers, randomly assigned to two groups that we'll call A and B. They get similar pills on a similar schedule, but one of these groups is getting the test drug and the other is getting an inactive placebo. So we're trying to control for the amount of clinical contact they get and their expectancy that they're going to get better. And then we test them again and compare the groups. These are beautifully simple studies, so simple that you'd think that we should be able to completely rely on them. But there are some systematic problems, and today I'm going to cover just one of them. And in some ways, it's the most basic one, the population you study. You can't have just everybody in these studies. Hey, everybody come and we'll give you an antidepressant or a placebo, whatever, right? If we want a treatment for clinical depression, we'd better make sure we're looking at people who are clinically depressed, who actually have the disorder that the drug is for. So maybe we'll put up a bus ad looking for people who are depressed, and let's say we get 1,000 people. We put them all through an assessment, and it turns out that a lot of them, they're more anxious than depressed, or they have a psychotic spectrum problem, or someone they're close to just died, so they're bereaved, or they're kind of down, but not really badly enough to meet the diagnostic criteria for clinical depression. So we screen all those people out. And let's say we're left with 300 people. But 100 of them are under 18 or over 65, and maybe there's something about those ages that makes their metabolism different. So let's get rid of them. Now we've got 200. And if we're wondering if our drug works, we'd better control whether people are taking other drugs. And the problem is, if they're clinically depressed, they probably are. So either we have to screen them out, or we have to see if they're willing to withdraw from all of those other medications before they start taking ours. And now we're down to 100. And we don't want to muck about with people who've had it bad enough to be in hospital or who are actively suicidal. So now we're down to 80. And we don't know much about our drug's side effects. So the pregnant ones, or the ones trying to get pregnant, let's get rid of them. And the ones who are getting treated for cancer, them too. Or who have a malfunctioning immune system, or have diabetes, and a bunch of other screen outs as well. So now we've got 50, 5% of the people we started with. But they're nice, clean cases who really do have the problem we're trying to study. And we give them our antidepressant, and we watch what happens. And let's say that it looks like we got something. The people who got the real drug got better, so do some of the ones who got the placebo, but not as many and not as much. Yippee! Maybe we have an effective medication. And let's jump ahead a little bit. Other people have also studied the drug, and all of these studies are submitted to the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration in the United States, or other governmental bodies in other countries, and the drug is approved for prescription by practicing physicians. Great. Who do they give it to? Well, physicians see everybody. They don't have the luxury of saying, oh, sorry, you have diabetes, so I have nothing to treat you with. Or your anxiety score is slightly higher than your depression score, so I can't give this to you. Or you were hospitalized for depression last year, so I can't give you this antidepressant. You're out of luck. We only let 5% of our volunteers into the drug trial, but the physician is seeing them and the other 95%. There is no drug for depressed diabetics. What do? Chances are you prescribe them the drug and you monitor the hell out of them to make sure that nothing goes wrong. And you hope. But where is the research support saying that the drug is effective for this kind of patient? There isn't any. You're extrapolating from the existing research, and you're hoping that the drug will be just as effective and just as safe for this patient as for the ones that it's actually been tested on. And there are always some foul-ups in that process. If you look at the rate of actual diagnosable clinical depression in the population at large, and then you look at the number of people being prescribed antidepressants, there's a mismatch. In Canada and the United States, there are more people being treated than should have the disorder. And it's probably worse than that, because you know that there are people with the disorder that don't get treated. In the case of antidepressants, these are routinely prescribed to people who do not meet diagnostic criteria for clinical depression. They may have some symptoms. Maybe they have difficult lives, lousy marriages, they're burned out at work, poor diet, no exercise, no social life. Their low mood is troubling, but it isn't surprising. Many of them are responding normally to bad circumstances. We're not treating them for being abnormal. We're treating them for being normal. That's their disorder, some of them. They're normal. They're responding as humans do. Well, maybe fine. Change is hard. If they're stuck in a lousy life, maybe we can at least make it tolerable. If they're bereaved or isolated or burned out or work for a lousy company that doesn't pay them a living wage, at least we can lighten the load. But let's ask two questions. First, should we? If we've created a world in which vast numbers of people are seriously dissatisfied, should we be drugging them up so that they don't have to change? And so that we don't have to change either, so that they don't demand that society changes. If we can drug them so that they don't complain as much about being underpaid, or living in a badly designed city, or having a polluted environment, should we be doing that? That's a tough question. But before we even get to that one, we might ask a different one. If we wanted to do it, if we wanted to prescribe them this medication, is it likely to be effective anyway? For example, do we have an effective treatment for subclinical depression, for depression that isn't quite as severe as clinical depression? And if you look at the data, there are two answers. The first is that we absolutely do not know that we do. We just have not studied people with subclinical depression enough to know that whether antidepressants really help them more than placebo. So we're giving medication to a population that has never really been tested for it systematically. The second answer is that if we look at the data we've got, it appears that the milder the case of depression, the less effective antidepressants are relative to placebo. If we look at the mildest level of clinical depression, there's not a huge drug effect, right? So the best guess about the effect on people even milder than that is that it wouldn't be any better. So maybe we don't have to worry about the ethics of drugging people to tolerate bad lives. We don't have those drugs anyway, so it's not an issue. But this points to a central problem with a lot of drug trials. Done well, they can tell us about the effectiveness of a medication for the population on which it was tested. But often, it was tested on such a narrow band of that population that we don't really know much about its effectiveness or its risks for the people actually getting it prescribed to them. But that's not the only challenge. There are more. And in coming posts, I'll cover some of those. If you like some of these ideas, my book, How to Be Miserable, 40 Strategies You Already Use, is available from any bookseller, online or in person.